Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue with Jenkins Quick Start. So what I wanted to go over in this video is, now that we've created our first build and kind of seen how we can use the build tools that are built into Jenkins to execute a basic SSH build, I wanted to take a look at the plugins real quick. So if you go to your main dashboard by clicking on Jenkins here at the top, and you're going to go to Manage Jenkins. We're going to stop at the Manage Plugins, and right now, because we've just installed Jenkins, our plugins are completely up to date. It's likely that a couple of times a month you're going to want to at least look at what updates are available for the plugins that you have installed, and then you'll get an opportunity to select all, and it will ask you if you want to update and then restart your plugins. By no means am I saying that you should simply check all plugins for update and apply it without making sure that you visit the plugin directory and their site and checking to see if there are any known errata, or if there are known issues with certain versions of Jenkins, or if there have been regressions in terms of bugs. Your Jenkins configuration, once you get it stable, is going to be something that you depend upon on a daily basis, so you shouldn't just assume that the plugins that are being updated are not going to cause problems in your environment. Just be sure that you've taken a look at them. If we go over here to this tab, this shows me all of the plugins that are available for Jenkins, and there's a ton of them. We can go all the way down to the end of the list here, and then you can see that we can install anything that we check, download and install after a restart, and then we can check for updates. There are over 700 plugins available for Jenkins that are in the official repositories for us to install. If we come over here to installed, we see that we've installed a number of plugins that we set up during the initial installation of Jenkins. What you're going to find is you're going to find plugins that are grayed out, and you're going to find plugins that you can enable and disable. Those that you can enable and disable are the ones that we installed during the installation of Jenkins, and they're not what are called core functionality, meaning that they are not integrated into Jenkins. They're simply a plugin that actually adds additional functionality. If they're grayed out and you hover over any of them, it will tell you that it can't be disabled, at least until we start to disable some of those plugins that depend upon them. So for example, for pipeline here, all of the pipeline plugins are going to depend upon pipeline. So if I uncheck pipeline, it will then make available some other plugins that I can disable. And as I disable those, it will enable any other plugins that have a dependency on them. So if you want to know what it is that you need to do to disable a plugin, you just simply hover over whether you enable or disable it, and it will tell you whether it can be enabled or disabled based upon other plugins that would have to be disabled first, or it will tell you whether you cannot disable it at all. And some plugins are core plugins that can't be disabled. So just something to keep in mind. And then if you go into advanced, it just gives you options to upload your plugins, pull from an update site. You may need to pull from a mirror and or add proxy configuration. But what I want to show you is, since we have available a huge number of plugins, let's do a search. And let's just do a search for SSH. So if I want to install a plugin, and for example, in this case, let's just install the SSH plugin. We simply check the plugin that we want to install, and we can do an install without restart, or we can download and install after restart, which is typically what I will do. Download and install after restart, and then I'll almost always check the restart Jenkins when there's no jobs that are running. If there's no jobs running, as you can see, it immediately will restart Jenkins, and then that plugin is available from within our configuration. So once Jenkins is back up and running for us, we'll log in with our user here. And once we're logged back in, if we go over here to Manage Jenkins, then when we go from Manage Jenkins to Manage Plugins, and it will tell me if I go to the Installed, I should be able to scroll down here and see an additional SSH plugin that's installed for us in order to use. Now, how can I configure plugins that need to be used? Well, typically plugins are configured in one of two places. If you go to Manage Jenkins, you're going to configure them in the system, or you're going to configure them in global tool configuration. Most of the time it's configured in the system. So in this case, if we go to Configure System, for example, we have SSH sites as part of our SSH plugin that we can connect to, adding those SSH sites, for example. So if I wanted to add a local host, port 22, Jenkins, I can provide the Jenkins password. And then here I can say, for example, tcox2.mylabserver.com, port 22, username Jenkins. Password, I'm not going to provide a password or passphrase. I'm going to provide the private key. So let's do var lib jenkins.ssh and ID underscore RSA, I believe. ID underscore, IS underscore ID underscore RSA. And now I'm going to save that file. So if I go back here to Manage Jenkins, configure my system, then I come down here and I don't see any error messages about not being able to talk to the system. So I've provided one SSH site called localhost with a Jenkins username and password, which I don't have to because I have a key. And then I have the host name tcox2 my lab server, which is going to be my, when we look over here, it's my slave node or the remote node that we're going to build upon. And I'm providing a key because we created that earlier. So now that we have a couple of those, let's do a couple of different builds here. The first thing that I want to do is I want to do a different kind of build for SSH. And as we indicated before, we were able to do builds based upon the local host because we've set up our Jenkins user to run, and this build right here is configured to execute a command for displaying the local var log messages. Well, now I want to execute a build that displays something remotely. So how would I do that? Well, let's go into these are our test builds. And from here we'll do a new item, a freestyle project, and let's call this remote remote log viewer. And okay. From here, remotely view var log messages. I'm going to skip these plugins and we're going to go to the build environment and then build. We can execute a shell or we can execute a shell script on a remote host using SSH, which is the plugin that we added. So what we can do is, because we've added that host to the plugin, we can say, hey, connect to Jenkins at tcox2mylabserver.com, and then let's do a sudo cat var log messages, which is basically what we ran locally, and let's see if we can run it remotely. Now, before I hit the run key, ask yourself why this build is going to fail. So we'll hit build now, and then it indeed fails. If we click on number 1 and we go to console output, aha, sorry, you must have a TTY to run sudo. And although we set the required TTY to not be required on the master, we did not do that on the slave. So let's do a vi sudo on, well, just vi sudo, and then require TTY. Let's insert our exclamation point, and that's all that we have to do. We'll come back to the project and we'll click on build now. And this time, when the build completes, we should get the blue, it's successful. We'll press number 2, and we'll go to the console output, and we'll see that we have all of these sessions that are part of the var log messages. So we connected and ran a remote script using an SSH plugin because we've provided that credential key that we created earlier. So we've got the ability to do that. Now that's just showing a pretty simple build in terms of how I would execute a script on a remote server. However, one of the other things that you might be doing is you might be pulling from GitHub. So let's take a look at how we might do a build for GitHub. And we're going to do multiple steps so that you can see the errors that are generated and how we're going to fix each one of them. So the way we're going to set this up initially, it's not going to work, and you might be able to see why, but just keep in mind that I'm doing this on purpose to show you how you can troubleshoot and make changes and simply rerun your build. So we're going to do a new item. Again, we're just going to leave it as a freestyle project, and let's say my git build. And not my gut build, but my GitHub build. And we'll hit OK. We're going to use the plugin for source code management, but before we do that, let's indicate that it's a GitHub project, and we'll give the URL to the GitHub project. If you want to use this for your example, you certainly may. It is a public repository, and it's nothing more than a README file and an index file for a website. So here, let's give it an advanced, and let's say the display name is my GitHub build for Jenkins. We don't need to worry about the project being parameterized. We're not disabling it. We're not going to do concurrent builds. It is source code management, so it is Git. Now we need to enter the fact that it's a GitHub repository, so we need to tell it what that repository URL is. And in this case, it's simply the project URL that we've already used. We don't need to add any credentials because it is a public repository, and we're going to build the master. That's all we're going to do at this point in time. We're not going to do any pre or post build triggers or anything like that. We're just setting this build up. Now what happens if we go to build this particular project? So it should go out to GitHub, and we have a problem. So let's click here, go to console output, and we see error cloning the remote repo origin. Let's take an educated guess at the fact that we probably don't have Git installed. So let's go over here to our master node, and if we do a git, no, we don't have it installed. So let's do yum install git, which will pull down the Git server and client that we need in order to run this. And then once we do, then the Git plugin, which is just Java, so Java is not recreating the Git functionality, it's just going to use Git in a known manner. It's the API that is going to communicate with the underlying operating system to get it done. So let's go back to the project, and now let's click Build Now. Now we get the little blue icon that says it's successful. We go over to number 2, we go to the console output, and we see that the Git build has been created. But wait a minute, where the heck is it? Well, by default, the GitHub plugin will build in the workspace that's created for your build. So this path right here should be initialized and contained the cloned repository that we just checked out. So let's do cd space paste here. And if we do an ls-al, we see there's the Git directory, the index.html, and the README file that's in Markdown, GitHub Markdown format. So if we do a cat on README, it just says my test repo for Jenkins, and cat on index.html. This is a test site. Okay, that's fine, but that's probably not extremely useful in terms of my project. I probably don't want it built to that workspace unless I'm going to execute a post-build step, which I can do. If I want to, at the end, I can say build or post-build actions. I can either build other projects, I can publish it, I can do other things. So I can execute a shell script as soon as it's gone, or I can do it later. But let's just check it out into the place where we want it. So in the source code management here, we have additional behaviors, and we have the repository browser. What we're looking for is we want to check it out to a subdirectory. So we've got all of these additional behaviors that the GitHub plugin will allow us to do. Don't trigger builds, merge before build, use commit, author, and changelog, etc., etc., etc. In our case, what we want to do is we want to check out to a subdirectory. So let's say var www.html, which is a typical place for Apache to have its default website saved to. It can be your vhost directory, var www.html/ the name of your site, what have you. So I click on save. Now, before I hit the build button, why is this build not going to work? Because it's not going to. So as soon as we hit build now, it'll attempt to check out the files, then it goes, uh-oh, well, I don't think that directory exists. Failed to make directories, var www.html. Easy enough. Let's do a make directories, -p, and var www.html. Those directories now exist. So let's go back up to my project and build now. Why is it not going to work now? We're going to get one more error, and this will be the last error we have to fix. So we go here, we go console output, and it will tell us error cloning the Git repo origin, the branch origin, because it could not initialize var www.html. Well, I know that directory exists. Well, let's see down here what is the return code 1 standard error. Oh, permission denied. My Jenkins user, it's not running, the plugin is not running as sudo, and it doesn't have access to those directories. Well, now I can fix that with a change owner to Jenkins and the group Jenkins var www.html. Now when I go back and go to my project, then I should be able to do a build now, and the build then should succeed. I get the blue icon that shows me that it does. The console output looks like it when I cloned it to my repository workspace, or my workspace for my build. And now if I go over to var www.html, you'll see that the Git repository has been created locally, and those files have been checked out or cloned to the local repository for the remote origin master branch. That's a much more common use of Jenkins in terms of dealing with types of builds. Is this particular type of build runs directly through the GitHub plugin. Now, could I have executed that build just through SSH by running the appropriate SSH commands, doing a git clone of the location? I absolutely could. There's nothing to prevent you from using SSH. However, all of that functionality has been abstracted so that all you have to do is fill in some blanks in the plugin, and that's why those plugins become very powerful and very important to us. Because not only can we execute things in the plugin, we can do things before the plugins, or before the builds are executed, and we can do things afterwards. So we're going to take a look at some of those options, and mainly we're going to take a look at how we can schedule builds, because, for example, in a DevOps environment where you're talking about continuous integration, you're going to want to build non-production environments probably on a schedule, whether it's hourly, nightly, etc. And then you can set up production builds that are set on the second Saturday of every month. We'll check out how we can add those parameters and some commands that'll give me some additional information on my console, as well as how we can set up notification in a subsequent video. But for managing our plugins and then using those plugins and the options that they present us to make our builds easier to create and manage, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.